All right, hi there, and welcome to MSL 202, Lesson 08 on the operation order, or the OPORD, Part 2. Now, this is the second part of a two-part series, so if you haven't already gone and watched the Operations Order 1 video, I highly encourage you to do so. It'll give you a little bit more background and information leading into this lesson that might be useful to understand what we're talking about now. My name is Captain Silver Beatty. I'm an APMS with the University of Montana Grizzly Battalion, and I'm going to be taking you through this lesson today. Now, if you've watched any of my videos, you already know that QR code right down there is going to take you to a website version of this exact same lesson that I'm about to lead you through. Now, through that website version, that URL that'll pull up on your device, you'll be able to click on some of the additional links that are located within my different lessons, as well as just have it on hand for future reference. Now let's get right into this one. Now, like I said, within that live website version of this lesson, there are some clickable links. That first one there, it's going to take you to a little bit more in-depth information about the operations order itself. It's a little bit longer of a document written in Army doctrine, but it could give you some more detail that you just might be interested in. Now that second link right there, that's going to take you right to this exact same video, just in case you want to go back and watch this all over again. So let's jump right in, but taking it back to the last lesson. Just as a quick refresher, we want to remember that there are three main types of military orders. Now, this includes our warno, which is that heads up or that advance notice that a bigger thing is coming. Then we've got what we're going to be talking about a little bit more of today, and that's your operation order, or the OPORD. And that's that full-blown 5-paragraph order in which we find out what our situation is, what our mission is, how we're going to do that mission, what we need for it, and how we're all going to communicate together. Now, as we know, all of our plans change on a regular basis, and in the military, what we do with those plans that change is we issue fragos. So that's your fragmentary order, fragord, a lot of us call it a frago, and that can happen anytime a modification needs to be made to your operation or any other directive that's been issued out. Sometimes that can just be said quickly as, oh, frago, we're going left instead of right, or it can be issued in a full written order that just highlights the changes to the original order. So quick refresher, we've got our warno, that's your heads up. We've got the operations order, which is the full directive. And then we have that frago, which is going to be the change to the original directive. Now, as a quick reminder of what the operation order itself looks like, here are your 5 paragraphs. Now, we touched on these semi-briefly in the last lesson. This lesson, we're going to go into some more detail and really get a little bit deeper into what each of those subparagraphs actually mean. So we have to remember, these 5 paragraphs need to go in order of situation, mission, execution, sustainment, command and signal, and then we put the most of our effort into that mission and execution, especially the execution paragraph. Now, the mission statement, that's just a 1-sentence statement that includes those 5 W's, right? And then that execution is the how we're going to perform or complete the task that we find out in the mission statement. Of course, your situation, that's obvious, that's what's going on around you. Your sustainment, those are the different things that you're going to need in order to complete this mission. And your command and signal, that includes who's in charge, how we're going to talk, and any contingency plans and passwords, things like that that we need to know going forward. So that's your quick down and dirty reminder of what the OPORD looks like, how all 5 paragraphs are laid out. Let's get just a little bit deeper into it now. Okay, so what do I need you to understand by the time you're done with this video? It's pretty simple. You need to be able to identify and apply the purpose and characteristics of an OPORD in just a little bit more detail. Now we're going to talk the characteristics, what they are and what they really mean, and then we're going to go into being able to categorize those 5 paragraphs, figure out where each subparagraph belongs, why it's important, and why it's found within the paragraph that we write it in. So let's jump right in. What is the purpose of our OPORD? Well, ultimately, they convey instructions in a standard, clear, simple format. It's structured, it's standardized in that we have all of those paragraphs in the exact same order. It's clear in that we don't use any kind of acronyms or abbreviations that those receiving the order wouldn't understand, and we keep it simple. So we've got the 5 paragraphs, we've got specific subparagraphs that go in there, and they're going to follow that same order throughout. No matter what OPORD you look at, it should be basically the same shell that you're using throughout the time. They also focus your subordinate activities, so it's a directive. This order is telling your subordinates what they need to do or what they need to be prepared for, either before, during, or after an operation. Now, they also permit your subordinates to kind of prepare their supporting orders. So we do OPORDs all the way down to the squad level. Now, for that squad to get an OPORD, their platoon, their company, their battalion, their brigade, their division, they all had an OPORD that came out as well. So each of those orders going all the way down to the squad level are written in a way that subordinates can then plan their portion of this bigger operation and plan how they're going to complete that part, as well as write their own order to their people. So for a squad, they're writing an order to 8 other people, whereas a platoon leader is writing an order to a full platoon of people. Now, they implement instructions from that higher command, right? So we're receiving these OPORDs through the different levels. The platoon leader is implementing instructions that they received from their company commander. The company commander's order is implementing instructions that they received from their battalion commander, and so forth. Which means that all the way down to that squad level, that squad leader is implementing instructions that really came all the way from super high up in their chain of command. Now, of course, as we go through this, you'll see that they provide those tasks, activities, purposes, constraints or limitations, and any coordinating instructions that are necessary for their mission accomplishment. So the overall purpose of this order is to ensure that everybody's on the same page and that there's a proper plan in place for before the operation, during, and after the operation. So what do you think? Can you think of a time or provide an example of a situation where unclear or overly complex orders might lead to an actual mission failure? And with that, in what ways can subordinate leaders actually proactively use an OPORD to anticipate challenges or allocate their resources effectively? How can they use the information from that to make sure that they're doing the right things, asking for the right things, and planning accordingly? And lastly, we know that an OPORD allows subordinates to prepare their supporting orders. That's what we just talked about. So what are the key elements that they have to consider when developing their own plans? And how does this contribute to the overall success of the mission? Now, those might feel like uncomfortable or ambiguous questions, but I think you'll feel a little bit more comfortable answering those as we go forward. So, what are the characteristics of an effective OPORD? Well, OPORDs have certain doctrinal rules that they have to follow or have to include, but there's a difference between just an OPORD and an effective OPORD. So we want, obviously, to be as effective and efficient as possible. So we have these different pieces and parts that we want to be thinking about when we're writing our own. So we want to make sure that we're including critical facts. We're going to evaluate all of the facts and the assumptions related to the operation, and we're going to think about those as we're writing our op order out. Now, they're authoritative, and they have this positive expression. That simply means that you want to reflect your intention and your will for what's about to happen. You also want to use very direct language about what you want your subordinate commands to do. That has to be clear to them. It can't be I kind of want you to think about doing this. It's, you are going to do this. This is my plan. You're following that. That's why they're a subordinate and you're leading the mission. They also are, like I said, clear and concise. This means you're using short words, you're using short sentences, short paragraphs. You're not adding a bunch of fluff language into this OPORD. You don't include any material that's found in your standard operating procedures. Now, those SOPs is what we call those. Those are things that line out like the daily or regular things, battle rhythms, different things that you can expect when this happens. So, for example, when we come across this type of terrain, our unit SOP is we move into this formation. Now that seems very simple on its face, but SOPs can become really, really long, and it's important that you understand your battalion or your company or your platoon or squad SOP. That way, as long as everybody's looked at that and understands it, you don't have to include that stuff in your operations order because it's already what's expected. What you do include are things that are going to be different from your SOP. Otherwise, people will just assume we follow what the SOP says when we take on this action or when this happens. Now, you can refer back to those SOPs just to remind people and avoid any additional questions that they might ask that they should already know. So just referring back to the company SOP, the platoon SOP, can be verbalized in a way of, we're coming here. When we get there, refer to what we do per this SOP. There's a lot of different ways to verbalize it, but essentially you just don't want to waste your time explaining things that everybody should already know. Now, you always want to use acronyms. We know that the Army has its own language, right? It's a whole second language that we have to learn. Use those acronyms unless they're going to hinder clarity. Maybe in your specific element, you use acronyms interchangeably for different things. Maybe you have the same acronym that can mean two different things. Those are the times that you want to actually lay out what that means. Otherwise, save yourself time, write the acronym, say the acronym. Don't waste your time using additional words. Now, you only do want to use doctrinal terms and graphics. Don't be using different types of verbs or nouns that aren't found in your task and purpose list. There is a doctrinal list of what your tasks should say in your mission and what your purposes should say in your mission. If you don't already know what those are, I encourage you to look those up. See if you can start implementing those into some of your practice OPORDs that you might be writing. Now, of course, they're complete. We don't ever brief an OPORD that hasn't been completed. Now, with that, you have to understand the time, right? You only have so much time. You may have heard of the 1/3, 2/3 rule. That's for a different lesson. So you want to make sure you're utilizing that time effectively, delegating as you can, so that you complete that OPORD and you issue a full OPORD. There's no such thing as a partially written OPORD. It's not an actual operations order until it's complete paragraphs 1 through 5. You also want it to be flexible. Leave room for some adjustments to occur. Have some different courses of action involved in there. Have things ready for the unexpected. We know that our best laid out plans actually provide for flexibility, because if you're too specific, when something changes, and it will, if you don't have something in place already, you're then thinking on the fly. So just make sure there's some flexibility in maybe your movement, your actions on, how you're going to adjust your different elements that are part of this mission, and allow for things to change so that you don't panic on the spot. Now, lastly, we have this characteristic of being timely. It means they need to be given quickly and efficiently as possible. So let's say you're a platoon leader. You're going to receive a company op order to you that you will then do what we call flip. You're going to flip that op order, taking just the pertinent information for your platoon out, rewrite a full op order, and give it to your platoon, mainly your platoon sergeant, your squad leaders. So with that, you need to be delegating. You need to be not focused on the movement and all these other things. You need to be focusing on writing a complete OPORD in an efficient amount of time. So that means you have to make sure that your subordinates have enough time to then flip it to who they have. So going back to being a platoon leader and receiving that company command op order, you are then going to flip it to your squad leaders, and you have to make sure they have enough time to flip yours and brief what's just pertinent to their squad to the rest of their squad mates. So timeliness is very important when it comes to writing your OPORDs. You have to make sure, don't use up all of the time you have for mission preparation in writing an OPORD. You have to make sure that your subordinates have time to do their part as well. It's going to make your life a lot easier. Okay, so when we're talking about efficiency and conciseness, what strategies can leaders use to ensure that they're identifying and including only the most critical information without overwhelming their subordinates with unnecessary details? And can you think of a scenario where a lack of authoritative tone might lead to confusion or hesitation in the execution of the orders? Just think about, if you're not confident in how you're briefing this, are your people going to be confident in your ability to lead this operation? Now, in terms of flexibility being one of those key characteristics of an effective OPORD, how can leaders of some sort of an operation actually balance the need for clear and concise guidance with the unpredictability of operational environments? All right, now let's dive into the 5 paragraphs and get just a little bit deeper into those subparagraphs. First, we're going to start with paragraph number 1, situation. What's the purpose of the situation paragraph? Well, it describes all of the conditions of that operational environment around you that actually impact that operation. We don't need to talk about things that aren't going to happen or aren't going to impact our ability to complete this. That makes sense. So what does that situation paragraph actually entail? Well, it's got your area of operations, also known as your AO, your enemy forces, your friendly forces, and any attachments and detachments. So if you look at this screen here, I've got a quick kind of down and dirty description of each of those subparagraphs there, but they're all very important to think about when you're writing your OPORD. And really, if you're in MS2 listening to this video, I want you, next time you hear an OPORD, to start seeing if you can figure out which part of these subparagraphs you're listening to. Now, the area of operation is what we call the AO. And in this subparagraph, we're talking about the physical AO. And that typically is going to outline the northern, eastern, southern, and western boundaries and includes a quick analysis of the terrain and weather. Now again, the terrain and weather that are going to impact the operation. Now your enemy forces, that's going into their general capabilities. You'll see we're talking about their disposition, their array. That means we need to know their composition, that disposition, the strength, the probable, and most dangerous courses of action that they would take. Now, with our friendly forces subparagraph, this can be a little bit confusing in how it's described because we're talking about framing our operations and objectives and missions nested within hire's intent and their missions. So it's our friendly forces, us, green suiters, and how those missions and operations are falling under the umbrella of hire. Now, this subparagraph explicitly states the missions of our adjacent units whose actions could actually impact hire's mission. So I know that it's kind of confusing. We're really just talking about the friendly forces around us and including us. Now, the attachments and detachments, you'll hear this sometimes. Typically in ROTC land, we hear attachments and detachments, none. But this paragraph in the real world, subparagraph, includes all units or individuals that are attached to us from elsewhere or ones of ours that have been detached and are utilized elsewhere. Now, why this is important, it's telling us what our capabilities are, what additional resources we might have. So if we have medics from another unit or another element that are joining us, that's good to know, right? But if our medics that are organic to us have been detached to go help a different unit that's part of this operation, we also need to know if we're short on certain personnel. That's where that attachments and detachments paragraph comes in. All right, so that is our situation paragraph in a nutshell. Now let's talk mission. What's the purpose of the mission paragraph? Or statement, if you will. Well, this one's super important, right? It's part of that meat and potatoes portion of the entire order. And this is going to tell you the who, what, when, why, where of an operation. It clearly indicates the task and purpose, the what we're doing and the why we're doing it. Now you'll see I have in parentheses there for the what, task. Now again, like I said at the beginning, there's an actual list of doctrinal tasks that you use within an OPORD. And then you have the why, which is your purpose. Why are we doing this task? Again, there are doctrinal terms that you need to know for what the purpose should state. Now, with that mission paragraph or mission statement, it is a one-sentence statement. It's brief, it's concise, but it's technically 2 statements because anytime you read a mission statement, you should say it twice. So you'll always end saying the first time of the mission with, I say again, and then you repeat it verbatim exactly the same way. Remember, you want to take it slower. You do not want to rush through reading this. So if you're a nervous talker and when you're reading things, you talk like this, take it back a little bit, take a deep breath before you read this portion, because every single person in your element should be writing all of these words down because it's 5 very important things that they need to know. Every single person needs to know. So again, this is how it should sound when it's being briefed. Bravo Company Task Force 122 secures Route South Dakota in AO Jackrabbit no later than 28/08/15, January 25, to enable the movement of humanitarian assistance materials. I say again, Bravo Company Task Force 122 secures Route South Dakota in AO Jackrabbit no later than 28/08/15, January 25, to enable the movement of humanitarian assistance materials. And then we move right on to the next paragraph. Now, the reason we take that slow is so people have time to write that down. The reason we say it twice is so that anything that might have been missed the first time can be caught the second time. This is such an important paragraph. This is the only thing that you say twice without being questioned at the end to say it again. So that's a mission statement. That's your mission paragraph right there. What's important to remember about the next one, which is the execution paragraph? Well, this is where you as a leader are going to create the shared vision. You're going to ensure that everyone knows their responsibilities and the responsibilities of the people to their left and right. This one requires the most time to plan and brief because it is the step-by-step from the moment you're leaving the alpha, your assembly area, to the moment that your cadre call index, or you're just off the objective. So step by step, the distances, the directions, the azimuths, the who's doing what, the movement of each element, how you're moving. All of this is included in your execution paragraph. So it takes a lot of time. If you're spending a ton of time on your situation and mission and not saving time and focusing on your execution, your mission is not going to be as successful as it could be. So remember, it takes a lot of time to plan, and it should be the longest portion of your brief. So what does this execution paragraph entail? It's got a lot. It's going to have your commander's intent, the concept of the operation, or what we call the CONOP, your scheme of movement and maneuver, your tasks to your subordinate units or people, your subordinate leaders, and your coordinating instructions. So what do all those subparagraphs mean? Well, the commander's intent is that clear, concise statement of what success looks like. It has your purpose, your key tasks, and your end state in a very condensed format. So you're opening this paragraph with, this is why we're doing this. These are the key tasks we have to do to accomplish this mission successfully, and this is what success will look like on the back end. It's a very quick statement, but it really makes all of your people get in the mindset of, this is the umbrella of the leader of this mission. Everything I have to do has to fall under that purpose, key tasks, and end state. Whatever I do as part of this mission has to be part of ensuring that the end state looks exactly like the commander wants. Now, the concept of the operation, this is a statement that kind of directs the manner of how your subordinates are going to cooperate to accomplish this mission. It establishes the sequence of actions the force will use to achieve that end state. So it's just more of that step-by-step, the concept of the operation. What does this look like? Now, your scheme of movement and maneuver, that is going to be the employment of your maneuver units with this concept of the operation. It's going to include your special teams like aid and litter, enemy prison of war, demolition team. It's going to include all your routes, your primary and alternate, your distances, your azimuths, what the leader's recon is going to do, what the actions on the objective look like, and any reconsolidation plans or movement off the objective. Now, this is where that terrain model or sand table comes in handy, because people hearing that, all of that information, they can't visualize it. This is where you refer to your terrain model and you are walking them through with that twig or that stick or pointer, and you're actually stepping through, moving your pieces and showing exactly what your vision of this operation looks like. Now, your tasks to subordinate units, this is really all of those tasks that are involved with that mission, who's responsible for them with the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, why, to each portion of this. So that's where you include your tasks to subordinate units or additional ones that you didn't already talk about during your scheme of movement and maneuver. Now, your coordinating instructions, these include any additional instructions that apply to 2 or more subordinate units. This is where you're going to find your timeline of the entire operation, as well as the commander's critical information requirements, so things that you as a leader require to be reported up to you. So that can be an array of different things, but just know that those 2 sections, those 2 pieces, are found in the subparagraph of the coordinating instructions. Whew. That's a lot. Your execution paragraph is long, and it's long for a reason because it is the most important part of this operations order. But what's the purpose of this sustainment paragraph? And do you know who typically briefs this? Now, this can change. There can be SOPs that state differently. The way that I was taught it is the way that I see most programs teaching it, but maybe your program does it a little bit different. Maybe ask and find out what your standard operating procedure is for briefing OPORDs. But the sustainment paragraph describes the concept of sustainment. So how are we going to sustain ourselves and what do we need? That includes your instructions for administrative movements, deployments, transportation, things like that. Now, at the platoon level, your platoon sergeant actually typically briefs this. So it gives you, if you're the platoon leader, a moment to just breathe a little bit, let them take over. Now, the reason that the platoon sergeant or an NCO counterpart briefs this is because they're the beans and bullets person. They're in charge of making sure that these soldiers are fed and they have ammo and an array of other things. And because food, ammo, medical supplies, all that falls under sustainment, it's really their paragraph, their baby. They need to take full accountability of that. So as a small tip, if you're writing an OPORD, ask your platoon sergeant to delegate out some stuff to the squad leaders, but ask them to put together that sustainment paragraph. And as you're planning, you'll start coming up and thinking of things that need to be included in that, and they will take that information and figure out what they really need for that mission or whatever type of operation you're about to go on. So there's my little tip of the day for how to include and delegate tasks to other people. So the sustainment paragraph can get pretty in-depth, but it's actually a lot easier than it looks on this slide. So it's going to include your field maintenance plan. It's going to include all of your classes of supply that pertain to this mission, your resupply and your distribution plan for after the fact, and of course, one of the most important pieces, your medical evacuation plan. So your field maintenance, that's just how you're going to maintain field equipment and vehicles. Don't worry too much about that part. Your classes of supply, this is kind of an important thing for you to start learning right now and what each class actually pertains to. Now, in ROTC and for the purposes of this lesson, we're only going to focus on 3 classes, but there are additional ones in there that you should know about. Class 1, that's talking about your rations. So that's your food, your water, things like that. Class 5, that's your ammo. This is going to describe how much each person's carrying, how much you have total, what you have available to you when it comes to your munitions. And then Class 8, that's your medical supplies. So your CLS bags, your medic bag, your IFAC, stuff like that, that's all included in medical supplies. And this can be a time to say we need 3 CLS bags or we need 8 CLS bags. That's for you to decide, but that's the subparagraph that falls under is your classes of supply. Now, resupply and distribution plan. This is your plan for resetting, reconsolidating, balancing all operational and personal supplies. So when we're done, what's your plan for making sure that going forward onto the next mission, everybody's got an adequate amount of ammo, they've got an adequate amount of food, water, where are we refilling our water, what time or how are we going to set up that everybody's refilling or eating, things like that all fall under your resupply and distribution plan. And then your medical evacuation plan. This one should be and can be long. That includes your medevac or CASEVAC plan, any mass casualty plans. Now, understand what mass casualty means per size of element. So a mass casualty at a squad level is going to be a lot bigger. It's going to have a bigger impact than a mass casualty at a platoon level. Does that make sense? So look into what that mass casualty plan should look like and try to frame yours the same way. And your casualty collection points or your CCPs, where are you taking casualties when they're hurt or they become incapacitated on the field? That can be, a CCP can be near an HLZ or helicopter landing zone. You can have a specific point where if people go down, we take them all to this spot and we'll reevaluate later. There's all kinds of ways that you can do CCPs. And then, of course, medical transportation. This is going to be how the medevac is going to be a part of this plan if needed. So you would probably want to make sure you have some helicopter landing zones, do your terrain analysis, and have 1, if not 2 or 3 available throughout your route. Because remember, casualties don't only happen on the objective. Stuff can happen from the moment you step out until the moment you're all done. So that's your sustainment paragraph. And lastly, we've got our command and signal paragraph. Now, what does that talk about? Well, command, control, and signal. This particular paragraph is going to identify the location of the commander, your succession of command, frequencies used, your commo plan or your communication plan, number combinations, passwords. So basically just think of anything you would need or need to know for communication. It's all going to be located in this paragraph. So we have three main subparagraphs, and that's going to be your command, your control, and signal. Now with command, that needs to be where your commander is going to be located. So if I'm leading this operation, I will be with the assault element. Like this is where I'm going to be during this whole time. The intended succession of command. So if I go down, who's next in charge? And then who? And then who? So that's your succession of command. So it's very clear that if your leader goes down, nobody just looks around and goes, oh no, who's in charge now? You already know who's going to be next up. And then they're also going to have their required reports that need to be gathered and sent up to higher. So that's things like your LACE report, sit reps, salutes, things like that will be found there. Then we have control. So with control, we have our passwords, number combinations, things like that. Now, do you know how a number combination works? You've probably heard the term, but have no idea what it actually does or how we utilize it. So a number combination means that there's an odd number that's chosen by the leader, the person that's briefing this OPORD. Users of that number combination use that and vocalize two different numbers to be able to access certain points. So to get in and out of maybe an objective rally point or just some sort of rally point, what will happen is the challenge, the person that's pulling security and challenging somebody that's coming towards them, will say a number. Now, the two numbers have to add up to that odd number that was briefed in the OPORD. So let's say the number combination is 9. If I'm pulling security and there's somebody approaching our area, I'm going to say 5 or use it in a sentence, and they'll come back with 4 in some sort of a sentence. And that way the two numbers 5 and 4 add up to 9. Okay, you're clear, you're good to go. Now the challenge and password is the same idea, but those are two different words. Now don't fall into the trap of thinking the challenge and password is blue sky. So if I'm pulling security, I say blue and you respond sky. That's not how that works. If the challenge and password are blue and sky, I would say, man, I really like the color blue. And they would say, well, have you seen the sky today? Now running password, that's a code word that we use on the fly. That is very quick. We use that running password. Let's say it's wagon. We're running in. We don't have time to do a challenge and password and do math to figure out the number combination. We're just yelling it. So I'm coming to you. I'm trying to get into that objective rally point because something's coming behind me. And I've got 4 people with me. So we're moving quick. I'm going to say wagon 4. That tells the person that's pulling security, okay, this is one of our own. This is a friendly force and they've got 4 people with them. That way, if 5 people come through or are coming, one of them doesn't belong. Now you can address that situation if it ever happens to you, but really I just want you to understand how number combinations, challenges and passwords, and running passwords actually work. Now that signal, that is going to be everything that includes your communication. So this is going to be your PACE plan, which stands for primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency for your communications. So my primary method of communication might be radio. My alternate plan is cell phone. My contingency is yelling, verbal, and my emergency is a runner that I'm going to send back and forth to communicate. Now you can put those in any order that you want, obviously make them make the most sense, but we always want to have 4 methods of communication because without being able to communicate effectively, we're not going to be able to accomplish anything. And this also includes your radio frequencies that each element should be on and the call signs for key members of the operation. All right, so take a deep breath with me. That is a fire hose of information. This whole time, if you've heard about OPORD, you just knew there were 5 paragraphs and then they say a whole bunch of stuff within that paragraph. But it's actually important to understand that there's a structured way that each paragraph is briefed. So I would heavily encourage you to go back to the very beginning of this, scan that code, have this lesson on hand, and then start talking to your advisors about maybe having a shell. Does your program have a shell that everybody uses? Can you take that shell and make it your own to make it make the most sense? And that shell is just kind of has all of the headings, the subparagraphs, the paragraphs, and it's blank so that you have time to write stuff in. Now, if you can get a hold of that shell, it would be really useful for you to start listening to some higher level operations orders so that you can figure out what you're pulling and how to brief one, where you're going to put the different information. Now, that's really important for you to learn as an MS3, your junior year, but if you're an MS2, why not get ahead of it if you're understanding these basic concepts from this lesson? So let's check and see if you do understand those lessons. When we're looking at this, what subparagraph, not paragraph, which subparagraph of the OPORD do you find your PACE plan? Remember, that's your primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency methods of communication. Would you find it in your classes of supply, your concept of the operation, the signal subparagraph, or your commander's intent? That's a pretty easy one, right? You're going to find it in your signal one. Plus, we just talked about it. Now, this subparagraph is where you can find the primary alternate routes, your special teams information, distances, azimuths, all that stuff that's needed throughout the operation. Is that found in your coordinating instructions, your scheme of movement and maneuver, your tasks to subordinate units, or the concept of the operation? Well, that's your scheme of movement and maneuver. That's going to detail all of that information right then and there. And lastly, where do you find the medical evacuation plan? Is that in your situation, mission, execution, sustainment, or command and signal? That's found in your sustainment paragraph. It's stuff that you need and a plan that needs to be in place. And remember, that's typically briefed by a platoon sergeant at a platoon level. Now, I hope that after all of this information, you at least feel a little bit more comfortable with being able to identify and apply that purpose and the different characteristics of an OPORD in just a little bit more detail. I also hope that with all of the detail we went into with all of those paragraphs and subparagraphs, that you feel more comfortable with being able to categorize what goes where in the OPORD. Now, if you have additional questions, which it's okay if you do, this is kind of a big concept to understand and a lot of moving parts. Please, I encourage you, go find your ROTC advisor, your instructor, maybe an MS3, definitely an MS4. Get those questions answered so that you can be more prepared the next time you hear an OPORD, and even more prepared when you're the one listening and giving an OPORD. Thank you for sticking with me through this. I appreciate the time. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Follow along for additional videos within this series, and I'll see you in the next one.